They say the desert is a place for penance, but I've always found it better suited for profit. I watched the sunrise bleed over the jagged rim of the painted basin, the light hitting the valley floor like a physical blow. Below me, the township of Cinder Creek was waking up, a pathetic collection of pine-board shacks and hope. They think the law protects them because a man with a tin star sits in a chair. They haven't learned yet that the only law in this territory is the weight of the air. Before I pulled the trigger, I adjusted the brim of my hat, feeling the grit of the high plains in the deep lines of my face. My horse, a black-hearted stallion named Midnight, shifted beneath me. He's as mean as I am, and twice as fast. We've been haunting this region for 3 months, and by now, my name is the ghost story mothers tell their children to make them bolt the doors at night. I don't mind. Fear is a cleaner currency than gold. It doesn't weigh down your saddlebags, but it buys you the whole road that I rode down the switchback trail, slow and easy. I wanted them to see me coming. I wanted the blacksmith to stop his hammer mid-swing. I wanted the baker to feel the flour turn to ash in his mouth. As I reached the main drag, the silence followed me like a shroud. People scrambled, shutters clattering closed, dogs whining as they tucked tail under porches that I stopped in front of the general store. The owner, a man named Miller who'd been foolish enough to talk to the circuit judge about my activities, was standing on the porch. His hands were shaking so hard I could hear the rattling of the keys in his pocket from 10 feet away. "Morning, Miller," I said, my voice like dry leather rubbing together. We don't want no trouble, Silas," he stammered. I leaned forward, resting my gloved hands on the pommel of my saddle. "Trouble is a choice, Miller. You chose it when you went barking to the law. Now, I'm here to collect the tax for your loud mouth." I didn't draw my Colt, not yet. I just looked at him until he broke, until he dropped to his knees. I spent the next hour systematically dismantling the peace of that town. I didn't have to kill anyone today. The look in their eyes told me I'd already taken their spirits. I took the best of his stock, burned his ledger in the street, and rode out as the smoke began to choke the midday sun. This region is mine. They just haven't finished paying for it yet. The smoke from Cinder Creek was still a smudge on the horizon when I reached the rim rock overlooking Bitter Springs. This wasn't a town of shops and families. It was a waypoint for the silver coaches heading east. To the locals, it was a lifeline. To me, it was a bottleneck, and I was the cork that I spent 3 days camped in the limestone caves, watching the stagecoach schedules through my brass glass. I didn't mind the solitude. A man like me makes for poor company anyway, and the silence of the canyons is better than the lying chatter of civilized folk. I spent the time cleaning my Winchesters and oiling my holsters until the leather moved as silent as a snake through grass. That on the 4th morning, the heavy dust cloud rose from the south. The Wells Fargo coach that I didn't meet them on the road. That's for amateurs and desperate men. I met them at the springs, right when the driver climbed down to water the team and the passengers were stretching their legs. Thinking the worst of the journey was behind them, I came down the ridge like a landslide. By the time the guard saw the dust I was kicking up, I was already within rifle range. I didn't aim for the men. I aimed for the lead horse's harness. One shot, a crack that echoed off the canyon walls like a thunderclap, and the team was a tangled mess of screaming muscle and leather that I rode into the camp at a slow, rhythmic trot, my scarf pulled up over my nose. The guard made a play for his shotgun, a brave man, and a dead one. I dropped him before he could level the barrels. The sound of the passengers' screams was a familiar music. "Out," I commanded, my voice muffled by the silk point. 3 of them crawled out. A fine-dressed banker, a woman in a velvet traveling suit, and a young man who looked like he'd never seen a drop of blood in his life. I made them stand in the mud of the springs. I didn't just take their gold watches and the payroll box under the driver's seat. I took their dignity. I made the banker strip off his fine leather boots and toss them into the water. I made the young man hand over a locket that clearly meant the world to him. Then I crushed it under Midnight's hoof. "It ain't about the gold," I told them as I backed my horse away, the heavy iron box tied behind my cantle. "It's about knowing that whenever you look over your shoulder for the rest of your miserable lives, you're going to see my shadow." I didn't leave them with a horse or a drop of clean water. I left them the 20-mile walk to the next outpost under a sun that was just starting to get angry. As I rode away, I fired a few shots into the air just to keep their legs moving. The word would spread now. The devil of the basin wasn't just hitting stores. He was cutting the veins of the territory. Let the governor send his rangers. By the time they find the trail, I'll be ghosts and echoes. They finally grew a backbone. Or perhaps they just got tired of bleeding. Word reached me at a high-altitude line shack that the territory had pooled its remaining silver to hire the Iron Scorpions, a trio of bounty hunters who'd made their names clearing out the hole-in-the-wall gangs up north. They weren't lawmen. They were butchers with badges. I heard they were waiting for me at the Ojo Verde crossing, the only reliable water for 40 miles. They figured I was thirsty. They figured I was predictable that I watched them from a mile out, perched on a granite shelf with my spyglass. They'd turned the small way station into a fortress. One was on the roof with a sharp buffalo rifle. Another was pacing the porch, and the third, their leader, a man they called Pale Weaver, sat in the middle of the road in a rocking chair, a shotgun across his knees, acting like he owned the dirt. They wanted a showdown. A dramatic ending for the newspapers. I decided to give them a nightmare instead. I waited until the sun dipped low, turning the world into a landscape of long, distorted shadows. I didn't ride in. I left midnight hobbled in a wash and crawled through the sagebrush on my belly, moving with the slow, agonizing patience of a desert predator. I didn't carry my revolvers. I carried a gallon of kerosene I'd lifted from a ranch 3 days prior and a handful of dry brush. While Weaver sat in his chair, staring at the horizon and waiting for the silhouette of a horseman, I was at the back of the station. I didn't shoot. I just poured the oil along the dry, sun-baked timber of the stable where their horses were tied. The first match flared. I tossed it, and the dry wood took the flame like a thirsty man takes whiskey. The screams of the horses did the work for me. The man on the roof turned, his silhouette perfect against the rising orange glow. I didn't miss. My Winchester barked once, and he tumbled off the shingles like a sack of grain. The second man charged toward the stable, trying to save the mounts, the only way out of this hellhole. I caught him in the crossfire of the burning light, 2 rounds to the chest that sent him spinning into the dirt. Then there was Weaver. He stood in the road, his rocking chair still swaying behind him, staring at the inferno I'd created. He couldn't see me in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. "Show yourself, Silas," he roared, his voice cracking. "Fight like a man." "I ain't a man, Weaver," I called out from the blackness, shifting my position so he couldn't pin my voice. "I'm the reason men like you pray before they sleep." I didn't kill him. Not then. I shot the shotgun out of his hands, the kickback breaking his fingers. I let him watch his horses burn and scatter into the night. I let him realize that he was now stranded in the heart of a wasteland I knew better than my own mother's face. That I circled back to midnight, mounted up, and rode past the edge of the firelight, just close enough for him to see my eyes. I didn't say a word. I just tipped my hat and vanished into the desert, leaving him to the heat and the long, slow crawl toward a town that wouldn't recognize him when he arrived. The hunters had become the hunted, and the region knew it. There was no one left to call. The air grew heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a localized apocalypse. I could feel the region straining under my weight, like a bridge about to snap. I had taken their gold, their pride, and their peace, but I had made one mistake. I had stayed too long in a land that was finally learning to hate me more than it feared me. That I headed for the high Sierras, looking to disappear into the timberline where the air is too thin for a posse to breathe. But as I reached the mouth of Dead Man's Pass, I didn't see a line of lawmen. I saw a line of fire. The people of the valley, the blacksmith from Cinder Creek, the banker from the stagecoach, the brothers of the men I'd humbled, hadn't waited for the law. They had come together in a way only desperate men can. They had set the brush at the mouth of the pass ablaze, creating a wall of heat and light that trapped me against the sheer granite walls of the canyon that I turned midnight around. But the way back was blocked by 20 riders. They weren't wearing stars. They were wearing work clothes and expressions of grim finality. No one shouted. No one offered a trial. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about an exorcism. I pulled both my Colts. The weight of the iron felt good, honest. "Come on then," I hollered, my voice tearing through the roar of the fire. "See what it costs to kill a legend." They surged forward. I emptied my first cylinder into the lead, watching a man fall, but for every one I hit, 3 more took his place. A bullet grazed my shoulder, another punched through my thigh, turning my world into a haze of white-hot needles. Midnight screamed as a round clipped his ear, and he reared, throwing me into the dirt and shale that I hit the ground hard, the breath leaving me in a ragged gasp. I crawled toward a rock, my vision blurring, the taste of copper in my mouth. I looked up and saw them, the ordinary folk I'd spent months terrorizing. They stood in a semicircle, their faces flickering in the firelight. They looked tired. They looked done. I reached for my spare revolver, but my fingers wouldn't close. I looked down at my hands and saw they were shaking, not with fear, but with the simple realization that the world had finally caught up to me. I had lived as a shadow, and now the sun was coming up. Go on, I wheezed, leaning my back against the cold stone. Finish it. I've already burned your piece. You'll never forget my name. The blacksmith stepped forward, a heavy rifle in his hands. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved. Your name is just a word, Silas. And words die when there's no one left to say am. The last thing I saw wasn't the gold I'd stolen or the faces I'd broken. It was the vast, indifferent sky of the territory, turning a deep, bruised purple. I'd spent my life trying to own this land, but as the final thunder echoed through the canyon, I realized the land was just taking back what belonged to it all along. The shadow was gone. The region was quiet at last.